चलिए आगे बढ़ते हैं। दिल्ली के आईसी सेंटर फॉर गवर्नेंस ने सरदार पटेल व्याख्यान का आयोजन किया, जिसमें विदेश मंत्री एस जयशंकर ने भी शिरकत की। इस मौके पर जयशंकर ने कहा कि सरदार पटेल संयुक्त राष्ट्र में जाने के खिलाफ थे। उन्होंने जूनागढ़ हैदराबाद के मामले में इसका विरोध किया था। वे इस बात को लेकर बहुत स्पष्ट थे कि भारत को अपने मुद्दों को अन्य शक्तियों के सामने नहीं छोड़ना चाहिए। इसी के साथ एस जयशंकर ने क्या कुछ कहा, आइए आपको सुनाते हैं।
They advocate divided loyalties to a point where in India, that has existed virtually as long as human history itself, is again envisaged by some people as a negotiation. In a democratic society, I can understand that there will inevitably be debates and discussions, but these should end up as national understandings and national consensus and not become a counterpoint to our nationalism. For that very reason, we should be continually committed to strengthening the national spirit and nurturing our integration. History has demonstrated the great cost of mainstreaming divisive politics, especially those centered around vote banks. The real tribute that we can pay to Sardar Patel is to never let our guard down. Friends, all politics are run by institutions and through their established practices. The quality of governance is often a key factor in determining comprehensive national power. At the time of independence, there were serious dilemmas that accompanied the political transition. It is to the credit of Sardar Patel that he stood up strongly for the continuity of our governance, whether it was stability that we experienced in India. Obviously, a great deal of the credit goes to the national movement, which instilled political awareness deeply among our people. But this venue is particularly appropriate to also recognize how crucial was the role of the bureaucracy in the exercise of nation building after independence. Sardar Patel, more than many of his contemporaries, was a bridge builder between the world of politics and that of civil services. Now, it's not just a question of structures. Contemporary accounts, including many of those who were his political colleagues at that time, reveal how hard Sardar Patel strove to ensure that decisions were not made in silos. And we are all from that world, so we understand that challenge. Probably his unique standing encouraged others to seek his advice and to share their anxieties. Though his portfolios were home, the states, and information and broadcasting, his policy impact actually ranged from defense and external affairs to development and finance. The takeaway here is the importance of integrated decision making and efficient systems of delivery. Today, when much greater emphasis is being put on continuous training and strong performance evaluation, the Sardar certainly serves as a symbol of good governance. Sound policy making requires a proper understanding of the environment in which we operate, and I'm sure none of you would disagree with that proposition. Since no nation is really an island unto itself, this applies as much to foreign policy as it does to domestic one. What makes Sardar Patel stand out was his hard-headed approach to challenges reflected in both strategic clarity and decisive action. He, at least, was never given to viewing problems through rose-tinted glasses, nor being swayed by the fashionable ideologies of the day. This was a man who intuitively gauged the big picture, who worked through all its complications and carefully prepared the ground for the right responses. In the field of national security, for example, he assessed the dangers in Junagadh in Hyderabad and Kashmir very accurate. And when the time came to act, he had no hesitation in using all the instruments at his command. And because the governance structures at this delicate period of our history saw him as their champion, they too responded to the fullest. In that sense, this period is instructive on how to get the best out of the system and deal with critical issues. Those two are lessons to remember. Of particular relevance in this regard is the handling of Jammu and Kashmir and the decision to refer the Pakistani attack to the United Nations under Article 35 of the UN Charter, which is the article on the threat to international peace and security. Now, there is a debate whether this could have been done better under Article 51 of the Charter as a right of self-defense. But Sardar Patel actually was opposed to going to the United Nations at all. He had resisted this in the case of Junagadh, and he had resisted this in the case of Hyderabad as well. And his logic was a logic of very basic realism, that India should not submit its issues to the judgment and to the interests of other powers. Sadly for all of us and for our nation, his caution was disregarded. And India, lulled by a sense of false internationalism, was set up by the United Kingdom, ably assisted at that time by Belgium, Canada, and the United States. What began as the Jammu and Kashmir question was conveniently changed to the India-Pakistan question, putting the two of them at par with each other, and with all the attendant implications. It took us a quarter century thereafter to settle the matter. Other than the misreading of world politics, there was an equally serious misjudgment of Pakistan by India. Within our system, Patel was the most forceful advocate of using all avenues of pressure on that country after the invasion of Jammu and Kashmir. His reluctance to take the matter to the UN itself stemmed from the belief that Pakistan was it was better to deal directly with Pakistan rather than in a framework that would allow Pakistan to manipulate. His own approach in regard to refugee handling and rehabilitation issues in the country also said much about his attitude to nationalist forces. Sardar Patel recognized that those who truly responded to the crisis should be supported without allowing politics to color his assessment. Today, we may be tempted to speculate what Sardar Patel's approach would have been to Pakistan-related issues that came up in the decade after his passing away. For example, would he have extended his support to the Indus Waters Treaty of 1960? Or dismissed it like the then Prime Minister as an issue just about a pail full of water that was negligible in the context of larger international politics, and subscribed to the justification that it was a decisive move towards a settlement and to peace with Pakistan. An understanding of the Sardar's life, policies and actions should allow all of us to come up with our own answers. Like any neighbor, India would certainly like to have good relations with Pakistan. But that cannot happen by overlooking cross-border terrorism and indulging in wishful thinking. As the Sardar demonstrated, realism must be the foundation of policy. India's relationship with China is similarly an issue on which the Sardar Patel's instincts are on record. and they differ considerably from that of Prime Minister Nehru. The most cited example was, of course, their famous exchange of correspondence in 1950 on this matter. In Patel's view, India had done everything to allay China's apprehensions, but that country regarded us with suspicion and skepticism, perhaps mixed with a little hostility. He highlighted that for the first time, India's defense had to concentrate on two fronts simultaneously. His assessment was that China had definite ambitions and aims that shaped its thinking about India in a less than friendly way. Now what I am giving you is a near verbatim summary of his famous letter. Pandit Nehru, in contrast, referred to China's protestations of friendship and warned against losing our sense of perspective and giving way to unreasoning fears. To him, it was inconceivable that China would undertake what he called a wild adventure across the Himalayas. He did not, and again these are his words, he did not envisage any real military invasion from China in the foreseeable future. Now, this exchange was part of an internal debate, and it obviously allowed the two leaders to express themselves very frankly, even if it was very undiplomatic. Each one reflected an approach not just to a neighbor, but to issues of national security and to world politics as well. Patel passed away soon after this exchange and must have surely felt vindicated by the events in the decade that followed. The point about the recollection is to stress the importance of getting the right assessment of the relevant situation. This is a key aspect of governance, because if we start with a misdiagnosis, everything else thereafter only takes us in the wrong direction. The result of the idealist view in this case, for example, shifted India's focus away from preparing our defenses. Instead, we spent our energies making common cause on third-party issues and advocating the claims in the United Nations of the very neighbor with whom we then went on to have a conflict in 1962. Now, governance is equally about undertaking the appropriate level of planning, right level of preparations, and ensuring suitable appointments. I'm talking in Civil Service Institute, so I think that should be fairly obvious. In 1962, our troops were sent to the Himalayan borders without the right equipment or acclimatization. And that was because there was virtually no planning for that contingency. And to compound matters, those charged with responsibilities from Defence Minister Krishna Menon downwards were visibly ill-equipped to deal with it. Now, this is not hindsight, because many questions were raised and in fact controversies erupted even ahead of the 1962 war. Today, the same challenge is being met, but it is being met with more painstaking and focused efforts in parallel with our diplomatic engagement. That our border infrastructure spending has gone up 5 times in the last decade is but one reflection of our seriousness. So too is the fact that we have such a tight whole-mill approach, which ensures that our system moves fully in lockstep. Indeed, even other facets of the relationship are coordinated in a manner that our national security interests are better served. Sardar Patel would surely appreciate that the integrated decision-making, which used to center in his time around his personality, is now increasingly built into our system. During the end of Sardar's life, India and China were both re-emerging in the global order as modern nation-states. The complexities of the relationship was just beginning to be visible. Much has happened in the decades that have passed, Today, our ties are again at crossroads. The present situation does not serve the interests of either nation. There is a way forward, and that is by reinstating peace and tranquility in the border areas, respecting the LAC, and not seeking to change the status quo. Beyond that, the three mutuals, that is mutual respect, mutual sensitivity, mutual interest, offer a credible pathway. After all, the rise of Asia can only happen when India and China have a positive dynamic. Another issue that has confronted our nation from the Sardar's time till now is the nature of the relationship that we should have with the West. This is with particular reference to the United States and to some extent, perhaps more in the earlier days, with the United Kingdom. Now, even by 1950, the duality of these relationships had become apparent. On the one hand, Western nations were our major development partners and they were our main interlocutors on the international stage. At the same time, on matters related to our national integration and our national security, most of all on Jammu and Kashmir, their role was mischievous, if not worse. All Indian leaders have sought to strike a balance, and the Sardar was no exception. How to get it right has been the perennial challenge. Sardar Patel's view was typically optimal, it was very grounded. In some of my own writings, I have referred to him as the pioneer of the India First approach. He recognized the realities of the global power structure and felt that they should be handled appropriately to gain full advantage. In particular, he appreciated the salience of the United States to the world order and believed in, we are talking 1946, 1950, and he believed that it would be difficult for India to industrialize significantly without American cooperation. As a nationalist, he had absolutely no problem standing up to the West on Jammu and Kashmir. But as a realist, he saw little point in crossing them on matters not central to Indian interests. At that time, India's vigorous advocacy of China's permanent membership of the UN was actually a major irritant with the West. Many of the less ideological members of the cabinet also believed that this campaign was misplaced. They included Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, amongst others. Now, in one of his last public appearances, Sardar Patel declared that many people, and we all know what that means, many people believed that India should not take American help because it would lose prestige and be perceived as joining a bloc. He, on the contrary, felt that India was quite capable of realizing and protecting its own interests and positions. So this was both a debate, in a way you can say, about our national assuredness as well as on global strategy. Allowing others a veto on our positions and not exercising choices because we fear their displeasure or what will they say if we do this. This is being neither independent nor being smart. Unfortunately, those ideological strands, the outlook that Sardar Patel was contesting in 1950, it still continues to this day. We saw that when it came to assessing the merits of the Quad mechanism in the Indo-Pacific. The difference between backing out in 2007 and standing firm in 2017 was one of clarity and of confidence. In the last decade, whenever we have returned to the approach of Sardar Patel, it has undoubtedly served us very well. While we largely associate the Sardar with the challenge of integration and with the promotion of our administration capabilities, some thought also needs to be given to his economic outlook. He had very strong faith in Indian entrepreneurship. And he actually envisaged unleashing our economic energies as key to rebuilding India. In that regard, he visualized partnerships abroad that would enhance productivity and upgrade technology at home. How comfortable he would have been with the socialist policies that followed his demise is something that we can only contemplate, though I think we can do that with some degree of confidence. That this eventually led us to the crisis of 1991 is of course an undeniable fact. It is strange that some seek to advocate again the very policies which brought the nation to that point. But the fact is, the government today is doing the reforms we should rather than the reforms. Rather than just the reforms, we must. And that is a phenomenon that would surely meet with the Sarkar's approval. Let me also say a word about vote bank politics, since it is so prevalent in our times. Sardar Patel was among those of his generation who were troubled by our unwillingness then to take forward our ties with Israel for that very reason. Like so
फिलहाल बुलेटिन में मेरे साथ इतना ही, पर अब वक्त हो चला है डॉक्टर राकेश गुप्ता के साथ हमारे खास कार्यक्रम प्लस माइनस का।